I thought losing my job before Christmas was rock bottom, but the real bottom was my mother leaving my suitcase outside a homeless shelter. She said something that silenced my 5-year-old daughter, unaware of the man standing behind her luxury car. He looked at her license plate, and his face changed. When he pulled up her records later, I realized she was not just abandoning us, she was hiding a secret that would destroy her life overnight. My name is Ella Ward. I am 42 years old, and until 3 weeks ago, I thought I had a handle on survival. I was wrong. Standing on the cracked pavement outside the Brighthaven shelter, with the biting December wind whipping through my thin coat, I realized I knew nothing about survival, and even less about the woman who had just driven away. My daughter, Mia, was standing beside me. She is 5 years old, small for her age, with hair that tangles the second the wind touches it. She was clutching her worn-out stuffed rabbit, a thing that had lost one ear and most of its fuzz years ago. She squeezed the rabbit so tight her knuckles were white. She looked up at me, her eyes wide and confused, and asked the question that tore my heart straight out of my chest. "Mommy, why does Grandma look angry at us?" I tried to swallow the lump in my throat, but it felt like swallowing broken glass. I could not answer her. How do you explain to a 5-year-old that her grandmother, a woman who lives in a 6-bedroom house with heated floors and a pantry full of imported chocolate, just dumped us on a curb like unwanted furniture? The image of my mother, Marianne Ward, was burned into my retinas. She had not even put the car in park. She had just idled her pristine silver SUV right there in the loading zone. The engine hummed with that quiet, expensive power that whispers money. She lowered the passenger window just enough to be heard, but not enough to let the cold air touch her perfectly coiffed hair. She did not look at Mia. She did not look at the suitcase standing lonely on the wet concrete. She looked straight ahead, gripping the leather steering wheel, and delivered her verdict. "This place is for failures. Ella, maybe a few nights here will teach you the value of gratitude." Then the window rolled up, the locks clicked, and she drove away. I watched the red taillights of her car fade into the gray gloom of the evening. It was barely 5 in the afternoon, but the winter sky was already dark, pressing down on us. The air smelled of exhaust fumes and wet cardboard. For a moment, I could not move. I felt paralyzed, not by the cold, but by the sheer, crushing weight of being erased. It was as if Marianne had taken a giant eraser and rubbed me out of the family portrait. I was not her daughter anymore. I was a lesson. I was a stain she needed to wash off before her holiday parties began. The wind picked up, cutting through my jeans. Mia shivered against my leg. That small movement broke my paralysis. I was a mother first, a rejected daughter second. "Come on, baby," I said, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to sound brave. "Let's get inside. It is going to be an adventure, like camping." Mia did not look convinced, but she nodded. She trusts me. That trust is the heaviest thing I carry. I reached for the handle of our large suitcase. One of the wheels was broken, so instead of rolling, it dragged, making a scraping sound against the concrete that set my teeth on edge. Scrape, scrape, scrape. It was the soundtrack of my life falling apart. The entrance to Brighthaven was heavy steel, painted a dull, institutional blue. Above it, a flickering fluorescent light buzzed like an angry insect. I reached for the door, but before I could touch it, it swung open from the inside. A warm rush of air hit my face, smelling of industrial cleaner and instant coffee. A man stepped out. He was tall, with broad shoulders that slumped slightly under the weight of a thick wool coat. He looked to be in his late 50s, his face lined with the kind of weariness that comes from seeing too much of the world's bad luck. He had gray stubble on his chin and deep-set eyes that usually held patience, but right now, those eyes were not looking at me. They were locked on the street. He took a step past me, ignoring the cold, staring intently at the corner where my mother's SUV had just disappeared. He squinted, his brow furrowing deep. I stood there, awkward and freezing, holding the door open with my hip so Mia could slip inside the vestibule. Sir? I said softly. He blinked, snapping out of his trance. He looked down at me, and then at Mia. For a second, his face softened. It was the look I had seen on a dozen faces in the last 3 weeks. Pity. The look that says, "Oh, you poor thing. I am sorry," he said, his voice rough but kind. "Come in. Don't stand out here. It is going to drop below 20 degrees tonight." He held the door wide, ushering us into the reception area. It was a simple room, linoleum floors, plastic chairs lined up against the wall, a glass partition separating the waiting area from the offices. It was clean, but it felt tired. "I am Caleb Hartman," he said, extending a hand. "I am the director here." "Ella," I said, shaking his hand. My hand felt like ice in his warm grip. "This is Mia." He gave Mia a small, gentle smile. "Hi there, Mia. I think we have some hot cocoa in the back if you are interested." Mia's eyes lit up just a fraction. "With marshmallows?" Caleb chuckled. "Is there any other way to drink it?" He gestured for us to follow him toward a desk, but as I walked past him, I saw him glance back at the door again. The pity in his eyes was gone, replaced by something else, something sharper. Suspicion. He walked around the desk and opened an intake folder, but he did not pick up his pen immediately. He looked at me, really looked at me, as if he was trying to solve a puzzle. "Can I ask you something?" "Ella?" he asked. His tone was casual, but the air in the room seemed to tighten. "Sure," I said, pulling Mia onto my lap to warm her up. "The car that dropped you off," he said slowly, "the silver SUV." I felt my stomach twist. Shame flushed hot up my neck. I did not want to admit that the woman driving a car worth $80,000 had just dumped her grandchild at a homeless shelter. It made no sense. It made me look like a liar. Or worse, a fool. "What about it?" I asked defensively. Caleb leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. He lowered his voice, as if he did not want the volunteer at the front desk to hear. "I saw the license plate," he said. I froze. Why would the director of a shelter notice a license plate? "It is a vanity plate, isn't it?" he continued. "Start with an M, ends with a D?" I nodded, unable to speak. Marianne's plate read M. Ward. She was proud of it. She said it showed she had made a name for herself. Caleb's expression darkened. The kindness evaporated, replaced by a guarded vigilance. He looked like a man who had just heard an intruder break a twig in the woods. He tapped his fingers on the desk, a rhythmic, anxious sound. Then he asked the question that made the floor drop out from under me. "I need to confirm this before I process your intake," he said, his eyes locking onto mine. "Is the woman driving that car your mother? Marianne Ward?" My heart hammered against my ribs. How did he know her name? My mother was wealthy, yes, and she socialized in high circles, but she was not a celebrity. She was just a rich woman in the suburbs. Why would the director of a struggling inner-city shelter know Marianne Ward by sight of her car? "Yes," I whispered. "She is my mother." Caleb sat back in his chair. He let out a long breath, running a hand over his face. He looked conflicted, like he was weighing a professional obligation against a personal moral code. He looked at Mia, who was busy trying to tie the ears of her bunny together, completely oblivious to the tension radiating off the adults. Then he looked back at me. The decision was made. "I am going to get Mia that cocoa," he said, standing up. And then, "Ella, you and I need to talk." "Talk about what?" I asked, my voice rising in panic. "If you think I have money because of her, you are wrong." She cut me off. "I have nothing. I cannot pay." "It is not about money," Caleb interrupted gently. He walked to the door of his office and held it open. "It is about the fact that your mother is in my system." He said. I stared at him. My mother? In a homeless shelter system? That was impossible. Marianne Ward would sooner die than set foot in a place like this. She treated poverty like an infectious disease. "You must be mistaken," I said. "My mother has never been here." Caleb didn't blink. "No, she hasn't been here as a guest," he said. "But I know that license plate, And I know the name. He motioned for me to enter his office. The fluorescent light hummed above us, casting long shadows. "Come inside." "Ella," he said, and his voice dropped to a grave whisper. "Tonight, there is something you have to know." I picked up our bag, I took Mia's hand, and I walked into his office, feeling like I was stepping off a cliff. Now, before I tell you exactly what he pulled up on that screen, I need you to pause for a second. I want you to go down to the comments section right now. Tell me what time it is where you are, and tell me where you are listening from. Are you safe? Are you warm? Because I was not. I was in a cold room in a shelter, about to find out that my entire life was a lie. So go ahead. Leave a comment. I want to know who is walking this road with me. Okay, are you ready? Caleb sat down at his computer. The screen glowed blue against his tired face. He typed in a password, his fingers moving fast. He navigated through a database that looked old and clunky. I sat in the chair opposite him, holding Mia tight. The room was silent except for the clicking of his keyboard and the distant sound of a siren wailing somewhere in the city. "Here," Caleb said. He turned the monitor toward me. I leaned forward, squinting at the screen. It was a donor profile page. At the top, in bold letters, was my mother's name, Marianne Ward. I felt a surge of confusion. Was this it? Was he just telling me she was a donor? That was not a secret. My mother loved to throw money at charities as long as she got a plaque or a gala dinner in return. "So?" I said, feeling a flash of irritation. "She donates. She likes the tax write-offs. That doesn't help me." "Look closer," Caleb said. "Look at the status line." I looked. Underneath her name, there was a status field, but it was not green. It was flashing red. And right next to her name, in all caps, was a note that made the blood drain from my face. "Pending review. Prior irregularities. Flag for audit." I stared at the words. Irregularities? Audit? My mother was a perfectionist. She hired the best accountants. She never made mistakes. "I don't understand." I stammered. Caleb clicked on a tab labeled Transaction History. "Do you see these entries?" he asked, pointing to a list of dates and amounts. I looked. November 10th, October 4th, September 15th. Amounts ranging from $5,000 to $12,000. They are listed as donations. I said. Caleb shook his head. "No. Look at the allocation code." He pointed to a small column on the right. The code was COMM-SERV-VH. That stands for Community Service Vehicle, Caleb explained. These funds were earmarked for purchasing and maintaining vans for the shelter network, vehicles to transport the homeless to job interviews, to get sick kids to the doctor. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "We never received those vans." "Ella," he said softly. My brain was spinning. If the shelter didn't get the vans, he clicked another button. Expanding the details of the entry, the funds were dispersed, Caleb said, but look at the registration data associated with the purchase. I leaned in until my nose almost touched the screen. There, buried in the digital paper trail, was a vehicle registration number, and next to it, the license plate number, the same license plate that was on the silver SUV that had just driven away, the same SUV that I had ridden in since I was a teenager. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The luxury car my mother drove, the symbol of her success, the leather seats I had cried on, the heated windows she wouldn't roll down. It wasn't hers. It was bought with money meant for the homeless. My mother hadn't just abandoned me at a shelter. She had been stealing from it for years. Caleb looked at me, and for the first time, I didn't see pity. I saw an ally. "You just gave me the missing piece of the puzzle," he said. And that is when I knew. The tears stopped. The fear vanished. It was replaced by a cold, hard anger that felt a lot like survival. Everything was about to change. To understand how I ended up on that freezing curb, you have to rewind the clock. You have to go back 3 weeks to a morning that started just like 1,000 mornings before it. It was the kind of Tuesday that feels invisible, the sort of day you forget the moment it is over. I dropped Mia off at her preschool. kissing her forehead, which smelled like strawberry shampoo and sleep. She ran inside without looking back, eager to glue macaroni to construction paper. And I drove to the generic glass building that housed Redwood Ledger Solutions. I worked there as an internal audit specialist. It was not glamorous work. It involved staring at spreadsheets, reconciling accounts, and hunting for discrepancies in other people's math. But I liked it. I liked the logic of it. In a spreadsheet, everything has a place. Every negative has a positive. If things do not balance, you simply keep digging until they do. Life is rarely that tidy. But at Redwood, I could pretend it was. I sat down at my desk at 9 o'clock sharp with a cup of lukewarm coffee. I opened my email, expecting the usual clutter of meeting requests and policy updates. Instead, I saw a message from Human Resources marked with a high-priority red flag. The subject line was 3 words: Organizational Restructuring Notice. My stomach did a slow, sickening flip. I clicked it open. Dear employee. It began. It did not even use my name. Due to strategic realignments and the outsourcing of our internal audit functions, your position is being eliminated effective immediately. I read it 3 times. The words floated on the screen. Disconnected from reality. 7 years. I had given this company 7 years of late nights, skipped lunch breaks, and meticulous loyalty. I had missed Mia's first steps because I was finishing a quarterly report for a client who didn't know my name. And now, my entire career was being dismantled in 2 paragraphs of corporate boilerplate text. I looked around the office. People were typing. Phones were ringing. The world was spinning on its axis, completely indifferent to the fact that my life had just stopped. A woman from HR appeared at my cubicle 10 minutes later with a cardboard box. She did not look me in the eye. She handed me a packet of severance paperwork that amounted to 2 weeks of pay and told me I had 20 minutes to collect my personal effects. I walked out of the building at 10 in the morning. The sun was shining, which felt insulting. I sat in my car in the parking lot and gripped the steering wheel until my hands ached, trying to force my lungs to take in air. I did not cry. I did not have the luxury of crying. My brain instantly shifted into survival mode, the same way it did when I was a child navigating my mother's moods. I drove home to our 2-bedroom apartment on the east side of town. It was an older building, the kind with drafty windows and radiators that clanked in the middle of the night. But we had made it ours. We had lived there since Mia was born. When I walked inside, the silence of the empty apartment hit me. It was usually chaotic in the mornings, but now it was still. I looked at the sliding glass door leading to the small balcony. Mia had covered the bottom half of the glass with paper snowflakes she had cut out herself. They were lopsided and jagged, taped up with too much Scotch tape, but they were the most beautiful things I owned. We couldn't afford a big tree this year, so we had made a wall tree out of green tinsel and felt ornaments. It was our Christmas. It was safe. I sat down at the kitchen table, pushed aside a bowl of half-eaten oatmeal, and opened my laptop. I did what I always do when I'm terrified. I did the math. I opened a fresh spreadsheet. I typed in my current checking account balance, $1,200.40. I typed in my savings, $3,500. That was everything. Then I started typing the liabilities. Rent, $1,600. Utilities, $250. Car payment, $300. Car insurance, $100. Food, $400. Mia's preschool tuition, $800. I stared at the screen. The numbers glared back at me. Cold and unyielding, the severance pay would cover half a month. My savings would cover maybe 2 months if we stopped eating anything but rice and beans. But Christmas was coming, and winter heating bills were coming. I can fix this. I told the empty room. I will find a gig. I will do freelance bookkeeping. I spent the next 4 hours sending out resumes. I updated my profile on every job site. I reached out to 3 recruiters. I felt a manic energy, a desperate need to outrun the fear nipping at my heels. Then, at 4 o'clock, a piece of paper slid under my front door. I walked over and picked it up. It was on thick, heavy letterhead. It was from the property management company, but the logo at the top was new. Notice to vacate. It read. I leaned against the door, my knees suddenly weak. I read the letter. The building had been sold to a development group. The new owners were planning a complete renovation to turn the units into luxury condos. All month-to-month leases were being terminated. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. The letter stated, please ensure the unit is empty and broom clean by January 15th. I slid down the door until I hit the floor. I sat there on the cheap laminate wood, holding the paper that effectively made us homeless. Losing my job was a disaster. Losing our home at the same time was a catastrophe. It felt coordinated, like the universe was playing a cruel joke. I needed a backup plan. I needed a lifeline. My mind went to the only asset I technically owned. My grandfather, my mother's father, had left me a small duplex in a working-class neighborhood about 40 minutes away. He had passed away 3 years ago. He was the only person in my family who had ever looked at me with unconditional love. When he died, he bypassed my mother entirely and left the property to me. But there was a catch. There is always a catch with my family. The duplex was in a trust. The terms of the trust were complicated, written by a lawyer who was protecting me from my mother's greed but inadvertently handcuffing me in a crisis. I could not sell the property until I turned 45. I could not borrow against it or use it as collateral for a loan without the co-signature of the trust executor. And the executor was a family attorney who had retired to Florida and was currently unreachable. Furthermore, the duplex was not currently livable. The last tenants had thrashed it before being evicted 6 months ago. The furnace was broken. The roof leaked. There was a mold issue in the bathroom that needed professional remediation. I had been saving money slowly to fix it up, hoping to move us in by next summer. But right now, in December, without heat or safe air, it was a death trap for a 5-year-old, so the asset was useless. It was a line on a balance sheet that offered no liquidity and no shelter. I picked up my phone. My hands were shaking. I started scrolling through my contacts. I called Sarah, a friend from college who worked in marketing. She picked up on the second ring. Hey, Ella, she chirped. Long time no see. How are you? I'm okay. I lied. Listen, Sarah, I am in a bit of a bind. I just lost my job and my apartment is being sold. I was wondering if Mia and I could crash on your pull-out couch for a week or two, just until I get my footing. The silence on the other end was deafening. It was that heavy, awkward pause that tells you the answer before the words are spoken. Oh, Ella, Sarah said, her voice dropping an octave. I am so sorry. That sounds awful. God, I wish I could, but Jason's parents are coming into town for the holidays, and the guest room is full of their stuff, and with the dog it just is not a good time. I understand, I said quickly, cutting off her excuses to save us both the embarrassment. It is okay. Don't worry about it. I called Mark, a former colleague. He didn't answer. I left a voicemail. He texted me back an hour later. So sorry to hear that. We are renovating the basement right now, so we have 0 space. Good luck, though. I called 3 more people. The responses were all variations of the same theme. Everyone was busy. Everyone had holiday plans. Everyone was sympathetic, but nobody was available. The wall of rejection grew taller with every call. I felt a profound sense of isolation settling over me like a heavy blanket. It is amazing how quickly you become invisible when you are in need. People can smell desperation, and it makes them uncomfortable. They want to look away. By 5 o'clock, the sun had gone down. The apartment was dark. I had not turned on the lights. I looked at the phone in my hand. There was one number left, the one I had promised myself I would never dial for help. Mary Ann. My mother lived in a sprawling estate in Glenmere Heights. She had 5 guest bedrooms. She had a pool house. She had enough space to house a small army, let alone her daughter and granddaughter. But asking her for help came with a price tag. I knew that. I had spent my entire adult life building boundaries to keep her out, to keep Mia away from her toxic criticism and her manipulative games. Calling her felt like surrendering. It felt like walking back into the cage I had spent 20 years escaping. But then I looked at the paper snowflakes on the window. I thought about Mia coming home, trusting me to keep her safe. I thought about the 30 days ticking down on the eviction notice, I swallowed my pride. It tasted like ash. I dialed the number. It rang 4 times. She almost never picked up, usually letting it go to voicemail so she could screen the call. But this time, on the 5th ring, the line clicked open. "Hello?" Her voice was crisp, cool, and utterly devoid of warmth. "Mom, it's Ella." I said, "I know who it is. Ella, I have caller ID. What do you want?" She didn't ask how I was. She didn't ask about Mia. She went straight to the transaction. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice. I did not want to sound like a beggar. I wanted to sound like a rational adult proposing a logical solution. I ran into some bad luck. I said, "I was laid off today, and my building is being sold, so I have to move out." I waited for a gasp, a word of sympathy, anything. There was only silence. I continued, talking faster. "I need a place to stay, just for a few weeks, until I find a new job and secure a new apartment. I have savings for food and essentials. I just need a roof, for Mia." The silence stretched out. It lasted so long I thought the call had dropped. I could hear the faint sound of classical music playing in the background on her end. I could hear my own breathing, ragged and loud in the quiet kitchen. Finally, she spoke. "Come to the house tomorrow," she said. "Thank you." I exhaled, relief flooding through me. "Thank you. Mom, we will be there by... We will talk." She interrupted, her voice sharp as a knife. Then the line went dead. She hadn't said yes. She hadn't said we could stay. She had said we will talk. I stared at the phone, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. I knew that tone. That was not the tone of a mother opening her arms. That was the tone of a shark sensing blood in the water. But I had no choice. I stood up, turned on the lights, and went to pick up my daughter. I put on a smile that didn't reach my eyes. I told myself I could handle Marianne Ward. I told myself I was doing this for Mia. I had no idea that I was walking straight into a trap that had been set years ago. I had no idea that the price of her help would be higher than I could ever afford to pay. All I knew was that I had to survive the next 24 hours. I packed a bag that night, just the essentials. I looked at the walls of the apartment. Knowing our time there was over, the safety was gone, the storm was here, and the only port in the storm was a house that had never felt like a home. Driving my 10-year-old sedan through the wrought iron gates of Glenmere Heights felt less like visiting family and more like infiltrating a hostile foreign nation. The security guard at the booth had taken a long, skeptical look at my rusted wheel wells before raising the barrier, his expression suggesting that I was lowering the property value of the entire neighborhood simply by entering. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. The leather was peeling under my thumbs. Beside me in the passenger seat, Mia was silent, her nose pressed against the glass. "Look at the big trees." "Mommy," she whispered, "they look like giants. They are just trees." "Baby," I said, my voice tight. I navigated the winding, manicured streets. The lawns here were not just grass. They were statements of dominance, chemically treated to a shade of green that did not exist in nature. The houses sat far back from the road, hiding behind hedges and stone walls, massive structures of brick and marble that screamed old money and new secrets. When I pulled into the circular driveway of my mother's estate, my car looked like a dirty smudge on a pristine canvas. I parked next to a black luxury sedan that shone like polished obsidian. It belonged to Grant, my brother-in-law. My stomach tightened. If Grant was here, this was not a casual family chat. I turned off the ignition. The engine sputtered and died with a heavy clunk. "Okay, Mia," I said, unbuckling her seatbelt. "Remember the rules? Don't touch anything breakable," she recited dutifully, "and use inside voices. Good girl." We walked up the stone steps to the massive oak double doors. I did not have to knock. The door swung open before I could reach for the bell, revealing my younger sister, Sloane. Sloane is 3 years younger than me, but she looks 10 years younger thanks to a regimen of expensive creams, preventative treatments, and a life completely devoid of financial stress. She was wearing a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my car. Her smile was perfect, practiced, and did not reach her eyes. Her eyes were scanning me, cataloging the fray on my coat sleeve and the scuff marks on Mia's boots. "Ella," she said, "you made it. You are late. Traffic was bad coming out of the city," I said, stepping inside. She did not hug me. She stepped back to let us in, creating a wide berth as if poverty might be contagious. "Mom is in the drawing room," Sloane said. "Grant is there too. We have been waiting for 20 minutes. I took Mia's hand and led her through the foyer. The house smelled of lavender and lemon polish, a cold, antiseptic scent that I associated with judgment. The floors were marble, hard and echoing under our feet. We entered the drawing room. It was a cavernous space filled with furniture that looked too uncomfortable to sit on. My mother, Marianne, was seated in a high-backed wing chair by the fireplace. She held a crystal tumbler of sparkling water. Grant was standing by the window, tapping furiously on his phone. When we walked in, Grant pocketed his phone and turned around. He flashed a smile that was all teeth. He was a handsome man in a generic, corporate way, always dressed in suits that fit a little too tightly, exuding the energy of a man who is constantly trying to sell you something. "Ella, good to see you," Grant said, though he made no move to come closer. "And little Mia." Mia hid behind my leg. "Hello, Mother," I said. Marianne took a sip of her water before setting it down on a coaster. She looked at me with an expression of mild distaste, as if I were a stain on the rug. "Sit down, Ella," she said, "not on the velvet sofa. Use the side chair." I sat in the stiff wooden chair she indicated. I pulled Mia onto my lap. "I appreciate you seeing us on such short notice," I began, trying to keep my voice steady. Like I said on the phone, "Things are difficult right now. I just need a place for a few weeks until—" "Let us cut to the chase," Marianne interrupted. Her voice was smooth, calm, and utterly devoid of maternal warmth. "You need a roof. You have no job. You have no prospects. You are, for all intents and purposes, destitute." I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. "I am not destitute. I am in transition." Marianne raised an eyebrow. Grant cleared his throat and stepped forward. Taking charge of the room, he clasped his hands together, adopting the posture of a reasonable businessman explaining simple economics to a child. "Here's the situation, Ella," Grant said. "We are willing to help you. We are family. After all, Sloane and I have discussed it with Marianne, and we are happy to offer you the guest cottage. You and Mia can stay there for as long as you need to get back on your feet. 3 months, 6 months, whatever." I blinked, surprised. The guest cottage was fully furnished. It was private. It was more than I had hoped for. "Thank you," I said, feeling a wave of genuine gratitude. "That is incredibly generous. I don't know what to say." "Don't thank us yet," Marianne said sharply. "There is a condition." I froze. Of course there was. "What condition?" I asked. Grant pulled a folder from the coffee table and opened it. He slid a document toward me across the polished wood surface. "We need you to sign the transfer papers for the duplex," Grant said. I stared at the paper. It was a deed transfer. The duplex he was referring to was a small, run-down property in a working-class neighborhood called Iron Heights. My grandfather, my mother's father, had left it to me specifically in his will. He knew my mother and Sloane would devour everything else he owned, but he wanted me to have one thing that was mine. He had put it in a trust with a strict clause. It could not be sold or transferred until I turned 45 without my explicit, notarized signature. He did that to protect me from them. It is just a formality. "Really," Grant said, waving a hand dismissively. "We are restructuring the family investment portfolio. We want to move that property into the Kessler Ward Family Trust. It will help us balance some assets." I looked at him. I knew Grant's business, a logistics company, had been struggling. There were rumors of bad investments, of over-leveraging. "Why do you need the duplex?" I asked. "It is falling apart. It is not worth much. It is an asset," Grant said, his smile tightening. "And right now, we need to show unencumbered assets to our lenders to secure a bridge loan for a new venture. Since it is in your name, we cannot use it as collateral. If you transfer it to the family trust, We can use the equity to leverage a deal that will benefit all of us. So you want me to give you my inheritance so you can get a loan? I clarified. It is not giving it away. Sloane chimed in from the doorway, her voice sickly sweet. It is keeping it in the family. You will still technically have an interest in the trust. Technically was the key word. I knew how these trusts worked. Once the asset was in, I would have no control. They could sell it, mortgage it to the hilt, or lose it in a bankruptcy, and I would be left with nothing. That duplex was the only thing I owned. It was my safety net, even if I couldn't use it right now. It was Mia's future college fund. I cannot do that. I said, Grandpa gave that to me. He wanted me to keep it. Marianne let out a short, derisive laugh. Your grandfather was a sentimental old fool who didn't understand finance. The property is a drain on you. Ella, you cannot afford the taxes. You cannot afford the repairs. We are offering to take that burden off your hands and give you a luxury home to live in for free. It is a fair trade. It is not a trade, I said, my voice shaking. It is ransom. Grant's face hardened. The friendly businessman mask slipped, revealing the desperate shark underneath. Look, Ella, he said, his voice dropping. I am not asking. I need that property on the books by Friday. The bank is closing the window on this loan. If we do not have the collateral, the deal falls through. If the deal falls through, the family takes a hit, a big hit. That sounds like your problem, Grant, not mine. I said. Marianne stood up. The movement was sudden and sharp. It becomes your problem when you come to my house begging for charity. She said, cold as ice, I am not begging. I said, standing up as well, pulling Mia close to my leg. I am asking my family for help during a crisis. And we offered help. Marianne said, you are the one refusing it. She walked over to the window and looked out, turning her back to me. The deal is simple. Ella, you sign the paper. You get the keys to the cottage. You don't sign. You leave. Now. I looked at Sloane. She was examining her fingernails, refusing to meet my eyes. I looked at Grant. He was staring at me with open hostility. I cannot give up my only asset, I said. It is all I have left for Mia. Then you have nothing. Marianne said to the window. The silence in the room was suffocating. I realized then that they had anticipated this. They knew I was desperate. They had probably been waiting for me to fail, waiting for the moment I would be weak enough to sign over the one thing grandfather had kept out of their clutches. I am not signing. I said. Marianne did not turn around. Then get out. I grabbed my purse. Come on, Mia. Sloane stepped into my path as I moved toward the door. She reached out and touched my arm. Her fingers felt like claws. Ella, be reasonable, she murmured. Think about Mia. I am thinking about her, I snapped, pulling my arm away. Are you? Sloane asked, her voice dropping to a whisper that Mia couldn't hear. Because if you walk out that door, you have nowhere to go. And you know how the state looks at homeless mothers. I froze. A chill went down my spine. What is that supposed to mean? I demanded. I am just saying, Sloane said, widening her eyes innocently. Stability is so important. If you cannot provide a stable home well, people talk. Social services get involved. We just don't want Mia to end up in the system because you were too stubborn to accept help. It was a threat, a soft, veiled, terrifying threat. She was implying that they would report me, that they would use my poverty to take my child. You would not dare, I hissed. I'm just looking out for my niece. Sloane smiled. I grabbed Mia's hand so hard she winced. I walked around Sloane, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I needed to get out of there. The air in the house was poisonous. I marched through the foyer and shoved open the heavy front door. The cold winter air hit my face, shocking and clean. As the door was closing behind me, the heavy oak not yet latching shut, I heard Grant's voice from the drawing room. He was not shouting, but the acoustics of the marble hall carried his voice perfectly. Let her go, he said. Then I heard my mother's voice. It was low, calm, and terrifyingly certain. Give her a week, Marianne said. She will freeze, and then she will kneel. The door clicked shut. Cutting off the sound, I stood on the porch for a second, trembling. They were banking on it. They were counting on the cold and the hunger to break me. They wanted me to crawl back and trade my father's legacy for a warm bed. "Mommy?" Mia tugged on my hand. I looked down. Her face was pale, her big eyes full of worry. "Why is Grandma's house like a hotel but not fun?" she asked. I knelt down and zipped up her coat, smoothing her hair. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw a rock through their window, but I forced myself to smile for her, because some hotels are just for show. "Baby," I said, "and we don't belong here." I led her back to our beat-up car. I buckled her in. I got into the driver's seat and started the engine. As I drove down the long driveway, I looked in the rearview mirror. I saw the curtains in the drawing room move slightly. They were watching, waiting for the clock to start ticking. I did not know where we were going. I did not know how I would feed us next week. But as I drove out of those iron gates, I made a promise to the universe. I would sleep in this car before I let them win. I would freeze before I knelt. But as the sun began to set, and the temperature on the dashboard dropped to 28 degrees, I realized that promises do not keep you warm, and the road ahead was terrifyingly dark. December is a cruel month to be desperate. The rest of the world is busy buying gifts, wrapping boxes in shiny paper, and planning feasts, while you are trying to figure out how to stretch a loaf of bread for 3 days. The air smells like pine and cinnamon, but to me, it just smelled like cold rejection. For the next 7 days, I treated finding a job like it was a combat mission. I woke up at 5 in the morning, brewed a pot of weak coffee, and sat in front of my laptop until my eyes burned. I sent out resumes to every company within a 50-mile radius. I applied for senior auditor roles. I applied for junior bookkeeping roles. I applied for data entry jobs that paid barely above minimum wage. I lowered my standards until they were scraping the floor, and then I lowered them some more. But the corporate world shuts down in December. It is a dead zone. Every email I sent was met with an automated reply. "Thank you for your interest. Our offices are closed for the holidays. We will review applications after January 5th. January 5th. That was weeks away. I did not have weeks. I had days. I managed to get 3 phone interviews. The first one went well until they asked about my availability for a second round in mid-January. When I pushed for something sooner, the recruiter's tone cooled. "We are not in a rush," she said. "It is the holidays." The second call was a rejection before it even started. The position had been frozen. The third call was for a seasonal retail job at a mall. I took it. I put on a headset and answered phones for a department store customer service line for $12 an hour. It was humiliating, but it was money. However, after 2 days, they let the seasonal staff go early because sales were down. I walked out with a check for less than $200. My bank account became a ticking clock. I stopped buying anything that wasn't strictly necessary. I cut out meat. We ate pasta with butter. We ate oatmeal. I diluted the apple juice with water so it would last longer. Every time I swiped my debit card at the grocery store, I held my breath, terrified that the machine would beep that terrible, rejecting sound. I tried to find a new apartment. This was even worse than the job hunt. I toured a dozen places: basement studios, drafty one-bedrooms, places with bars on the windows. I was willing to live anywhere. But the moment the landlords asked for proof of income, the conversation ended. "I have savings," I would say, showing them my bank statement. "I can pay 3 months up front." They would look at the statement, see the dwindling number, and shake their heads. "We need to see 3 times the monthly rent in consistent income." They would recite like robots. Company policy. I felt like I was screaming behind a glass wall. I was a responsible person. I had a credit score of 750. I had never missed a payment in my life. But without that current pay stub, I was radioactive. The system is designed to keep you safe as long as you are inside it. But the moment you slip out, it locks the doors and refuses to let you back in. I drove out to my grandfather's duplex one afternoon while Mia was at school. I needed to see if it was possible. Maybe I was being too picky. Maybe we could tough it out. I unlocked the front door and was hit by a smell of damp earth and stale air. The temperature inside was the same as outside, 30 degrees. I walked through the empty rooms, my breath puffing in clouds before me. The renovation crew I had hired months ago had gutted the bathroom before stopping work when I paused the payments. There was no toilet, just a hole in the floor covered by plywood. The furnace was red-tagged, deemed unsafe to operate. I stood in the center of the living room, wrapping my arms around myself. I could see my breath. I imagined Mia sleeping here. I imagined her waking up shivering, or getting sick from the black mold I could see creeping up the drywall in the corner. It wasn't a home, it was a health hazard. If I brought her here, and anyone found out, a teacher, a doctor, my sister, they would have grounds to call Child Protective Services. It would be negligence. Marianne and Sloan would win without even lifting a finger. I locked the door and drove away, crying in the car. I hit the steering wheel until my palms bruised. I was trapped. The nights were the hardest. During the day, I could keep busy, I could hustle. But at night, the silence of the apartment was heavy. The boxes were packed, the walls were bare. The deadline to vacate was looming like an execution date. One night, I sat by Mia's bed watching her sleep. She was curled up under her duvet, one hand clutching her stuffed rabbit, the other thrown over her head. She looked so peaceful, so trusting. She had no idea that her mother was failing her. She had no idea that we were teetering on the edge of a cliff. Sloane's voice echoed in my head. I don't want Mia to lack stability. They were waiting for me to break. They knew I had no options. They had probably blacklisted me in their social circles, ensuring no one would lend me a hand. It was a siege. They were starving me out. I looked at Mia, and a cold realization washed over me. The most dangerous thing right now wasn't poverty. It wasn't the cold. It was fear. Fear was making me frantic. Fear was clouding my judgment, and my mother knew exactly how to weaponize that fear. If I kept going like this, we would end up on the street. And if we ended up on the street, they would take Mia. I could not let that happen. I had to protect her, even if it meant swallowing my pride, even if it meant losing the duplex. A house is just wood and brick. My daughter was flesh and blood. I stood up. My legs felt heavy. I walked into the kitchen and picked up my phone. It was 9 o'clock at night. I dialed my mother's number. My hand was shaking so bad I almost dropped the phone. I hated myself in that moment. I hated the weakness, but I loved my daughter more than I hated my mother. She answered on the second ring. Hello, Ella. She didn't sound surprised. She sounded like she had been sitting by the phone, watching a timer count down. I can't find a place, I said. The words tasted like bile. Silence. She was making me say it. She wanted the full surrender. I need help. Mom, I whispered, just for a few weeks, until the new year. I will look at the paperwork for the duplex. I didn't say I would sign it. I said I would look at it. It was a tiny rebellion, a pathetic attempt to keep a shred of dignity. Marianne didn't press the point. She didn't need to. She knew she had won. Pack your bags, she said. Her voice was brisk, efficient. Be ready tomorrow evening. Thank you, I said, closing my eyes. What time should we come over? Don't drive, she said. Your car is unreliable and I don't want it leaking oil on my driveway. I will come to get you. Okay, I said. What time? 6 o'clock, she said. Be at the curb. She hung up. She didn't ask how Mia was. She didn't say I love you. She just gave an order and a time. The next day passed in a blur of gray resignation. I finished packing our lives into 2 large suitcases and 3 cardboard boxes. I explained to Mia that we were going on a trip. Are we going to Grandma's big house? She asked, jumping up and down. The one with the velvet couches? Yes, baby, I said, forcing a smile. We are going to see Grandma. She clapped her hands. I hope she has cookies. I didn't have the heart to tell her that Marianne didn't keep cookies. She kept low-carb almond crisps that tasted like cardboard. At 5:50, I dragged our suitcases down to the curb. The sky was dark, pitch black, and the streetlights were flickering. It had started to snow. a wet, slushy sleet that soaked through my shoes immediately. Mia was wearing her pink puffer coat and a hat with bear ears. She was vibrating with excitement. To her, this was a holiday treat. To me, it felt like a funeral procession. At 6 o'clock sharp, the silver SUV turned the corner. The headlights cut through the gloom, blindingly bright. It pulled up to the curb, and the window rolled down. "Get in," my mother said. She didn't get out to help with the bags. I lifted the heavy suitcases into the trunk myself, my muscles straining. I buckled Mia into her booster seat in the back. I climbed into the passenger seat. The car was warm. It smelled of expensive leather and that same lavender polish. Classical music was playing softly. "Hello." "Mother," I said. Marianne didn't look at me. She put the car in gear and pulled away from the curb. "Hello." "Mia," she said to the rearview mirror, her tone flat. "Hi, Grandma," Mia chirped. "I brought my bunny." "That is nice," Marianne said. She drove in silence. I watched the city pass by outside the window. I expected her to head toward the highway, toward the suburbs where Glenmere Heights sat on its hill, but she didn't turn left at the intersection. She turned right. I frowned. "Where are we going?" Marianne didn't answer. She kept her eyes on the road. "Mom?" I asked, a prickle of unease starting at the base of my neck. "The highway is the other way. I have an errand to run first," she said vaguely. I relaxed slightly. An errand. That made sense. Marianne was always running errands, always busy with her committees and her social obligations. But as we drove, the neighborhood began to change. The tall office buildings and nice apartment complexes gave way to warehouses and chain-link fences. The streetlights became fewer and farther between. We were heading into the industrial district, the part of the city where the factories used to be. This wasn't an errand district. There were no shops here, no dry cleaners, no bakeries. My heart started to beat faster. "Mom, where are we going?" I asked again, my voice sharper this time. She ignored me. She took a turn down a street lined with old brick buildings. Some of them were boarded up. Others had lights on. But they weren't businesses I recognized. Then I saw the sign. It was a modest sign, blue and white, illuminated by a single floodlight. Bright Haven Shelter, Emergency Housing Family Support. My stomach dropped. The blood drained from my face. "Mom?" I whispered. "Why are we here?" She pulled the car up to the curb, right in front of the steel doors. She put the transmission in park. She turned in her seat to face me, and for the first time, she looked me in the eye. Her expression was not angry. It was not triumphant. It was chillingly indifferent. "You said you needed a roof." "Ella," she said. I stared at her, unable to comprehend what she was saying. You said we could come to the house. I said you could stay at the house if you signed the papers." She corrected me calmly. "You didn't sign. You said you would look at them." "I will sign," I stammered, panic rising in my throat like bile. "I will sign them tonight. Just let us come home. It is too late for that," Marianne said. She reached over and unlocked the doors. The click sounded like a gunshot. "You need to learn. Ella, you have always been stubborn. You think the world owes you a living. You think you can defy your family and then run back when things get hard without consequences." She gestured toward the shelter. "This is reality. This is where people go when they have nothing, if you want to experience the bottom. Here it is. Mom, please," I begged, grabbing her arm. "Mia is in the back. You cannot leave us here. It is freezing." She pulled her arm away as if I had burned her. "Mia is fine," she said. "A night or two here will not kill her. But maybe it will wake you up. When you are ready to stop playing games and sign that deed properly, with a notary, not a promise, you call me. Until then, this is the help you qualify for." She looked at me with eyes that were hard as diamonds. "Get out." I couldn't move. I was paralyzed by the cruelty of it. This was a calculated lesson. She wasn't just refusing to help. She was actively punishing me. She had driven us here to show me exactly how far I had fallen. "Mommy?" Mia's voice came from the back seat, small and scared. "Why are we stopping? Is this Grandma's house? I turned to look at my daughter. She was looking out the window at the grim brick building with the bars on the lower windows. No, baby, I choked out. Get out, Ella, Marianne repeated, or I will have the driver remove you. I looked at the driver's seat. There was no driver. She was driving. She meant she would drag me out herself. I unbuckled my seatbelt. My hands were numb. I opened the door and stepped out into the slush. The cold wind hit me instantly, biting through my coat. I opened the back door and unbuckled Mia. She clung to me, confused. I grabbed our suitcase from the trunk. As soon as my hands were off the car, the trunk hissed shut automatically. I stood there on the curb, holding my daughter's hand, the suitcase scraping against the wet pavement. Marianne rolled down the window one last time. This place is for failures. Ella, she said, and then she drove away. I watched her taillights disappear, leaving us in the dark. I turned toward the blue door of the shelter. I had never felt so small in my life. I had never felt so angry. But as I stood there, shivering, I didn't know that the man inside that building was about to hand me the weapon I needed to burn her whole world down. The taillights of the silver SUV became two red, blurry dots in the distance before vanishing completely around the corner of the brick warehouse. The sound of the engine, that smooth, expensive purr, was replaced by the harsh whistle of the wind cutting through the alleyway. I stood there on the cracked sidewalk, the handle of my suitcase digging into my frozen palm. It felt like I was standing on the edge of the world. The street was empty. The windows of the buildings around us were dark. Staring down like indifferent eyes, I felt a strange, hollow sensation in my chest, as if someone had reached inside and scooped out all my vital organs, leaving just a shell behind. I was not just abandoned, I was erased. It was as if my mother had taken a giant eraser and rubbed me out of the family portrait, leaving only a blank space where her daughter used to be. Mia tugged on my coat, pulling me back to the brutal reality of the moment. She looked up at me, her face pale under the street lamp, her eyes wide and wet. "Mommy?" she asked, her voice trembling in the cold air. "What did we do wrong? Why is Grandma mad?" The question hit me harder than the freezing wind. I looked down at her, at the small, innocent face that trusted me to make the world make sense. I opened my mouth to answer, to tell her that we hadn't done anything, that adults are sometimes cruel for reasons that have nothing to do with children, but no sound came out. My throat was frozen shut. How do you explain to a 5-year-old that her grandmother prefers her pride over her family? Before I could find the words, the heavy steel door in front of us groaned open. A rectangle of yellow light spilled out onto the wet pavement, illuminating the slush around our boots. A man stepped into the frame. It was the man I would come to know as Caleb Hartman. He didn't look like a bureaucrat. He looked like a man who had been in a fight with the world and had settled for a draw. He was wearing a thick gray cardigan over a flannel shirt, and his face was etched with deep lines of exhaustion. But when he looked at us, his eyes were sharp. He didn't look through us like the people on the street did. He saw us. "You can't stand out there," he said. His voice was gravelly but not unkind. "It is going to be 10 degrees tonight. Come inside." He reached out and took the handle of the suitcase from my grip. His hand was warm, a shocking contrast to the ice in my veins. He didn't wait for me to answer. He just pulled the heavy bag over the threshold, creating a path for us to follow. I ushered Mia inside. The door clanged shut behind us, cutting off the wind. The silence in the lobby was sudden and absolute. The air smelled of industrial lemon cleaner and old coffee, but to me, it smelled like safety. It was warm. The heating vents were rattling overhead, pumping out air that thawed the numbness in my cheeks. Caleb walked behind a scuffed reception desk. He didn't ask us why we were there. He didn't ask where our car was. He just opened a drawer and pulled out a fresh intake form. "I need names," he said, picking up a pen. "Ella," I whispered. My voice sounded foreign to my own ears. "Ella Ward. And this is Mia." Caleb wrote it down. He moved with a slow, deliberate calmness that helped settle the panic fluttering in my chest. He asked for our dates of birth. He asked if we had any medical conditions. He asked if we had eaten dinner. We have some soup left in the kitchen, he said, glancing at Mia, and I think there is a box of crackers. Thank you, I said. He looked up from the paper, his pen hovering over the line for emergency contact. He looked at me, and then he looked down at the paper again. He tapped the pen against the desk. A rhythmic, thinking sound. Ward, he said softly. He looked up at me again. His expression had shifted. The professional detachment was gone, replaced by a flicker of recognition that bordered on confusion. He stood up and walked around the desk to where we were standing. He looked out the small window in the steel door, staring at the empty spot on the curb where my mother's car had been idling just moments ago. That SUV that dropped you off, he said. I stiffened. I was ready for the judgment. I was ready for him to ask why a woman who gets dropped off in an $80,000 car needs a shelter bed. I saw the plate, he said. M. Ward, is that right? I nodded, shame burning the back of my neck. Yes. And the driver? He asked. My mother. I said, Marianne Ward. Caleb didn't say anything for a long moment. He just looked at me, his eyes searching my face as if he were trying to solve a complex math problem. Then he let out a long, slow breath. Come with me, he said. He didn't lead us to the dormitory. He led us down a short hallway to a small office. It was cluttered, with stacks of paper covering every surface and a bulletin board overflowing with flyers. He motioned for me to sit in a plastic chair. He pulled a second chair over for Mia and handed her a small stress ball shaped like a star to play with. Then he sat behind his computer. Ella, he said, his voice dropping to a serious, confidential tone. What I am about to show you is, well, it is irregular, but given what I just saw outside, I think you need to see it. He typed in a password. The keyboard clacked loudly in the small room. Do you know what the Beacon Harbor Relief Fund is? He asked. I shook my head. No, it is an umbrella organization, he explained. They manage donations and grants for a network of shelters in the city. Including this one, they handle the big money, corporate sponsors, wealthy private donors. He turned the monitor so I could see it. The screen displayed a database profile. At the top, in bold letters, was the name, Marianne Ward. My mother is a donor? I asked. That makes sense. She likes the tax write-offs. She likes the galas. Caleb nodded. She is a donor, a big one. She sits on the steering committee for the fund. He clicked on a tab labeled Allocations. But here's the thing. Ella, he said, we have been having some issues lately. Budget shortfalls. Money that is supposed to come to us for operations getting held up in administrative review. So, I have been doing some digging. I have been tracking where the specific earmarked funds go. He pointed a finger at a line item on the screen. Look at this entry from 6 months ago, he said. I leaned in. The entry was for $12,000. The description read, Community Outreach Logistics, Vehicle Maintenance Fuel Subsidy. Okay, I said, my auditor brain kicking in automatically. It is a transportation expense. Right, Caleb said. Now look at the asset tag. He highlighted a string of text next to the amount. It was a vehicle identification number, followed by a license plate number. M-Ward. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the screen. That was my mother's license plate. The same plate that was on the luxury SUV she used to drive to country clubs and spa appointments. That is her car, I said, my voice barely a whisper. That is her personal car. Caleb nodded grimly. According to this registry, that vehicle is classified as a community service asset. It is listed as a fleet vehicle used for transporting shelter residents to job interviews and medical appointments. Because of that classification, all its fuel, insurance, and maintenance costs are paid for by the charity fund. I felt a wave of nausea. She was expensing her lifestyle to a homeless charity. Every time she filled up her tank, every time she got an oil change, every time she paid her insurance premium, it was coming out of a pot of money meant for people who had nothing. But that is not all, Caleb said. He clicked another tab. This one was a scanned document. It was a reimbursement form. I saw my mother's signature at the bottom. It was flamboyant and confident. Above it was a list of expenses, consulting fees, strategic planning, venue rental, fundraising prep, The checks were made out to a company called Kessler Logistics Group. Kessler, I said, that is my brother-in-law's company, Grant Kessler. Caleb looked at me. So the money goes from the charity to a shell vendor and stays in the family. He typed a few more keys and brought up a status report on my mother's file. This is what I found 2 days ago. He said, the text on the screen was red. It was a system flag, likely automated by an algorithm that caught repetitive number patterns. Status, pending review. Note, prior irregularities detected, cross-reference required. Caleb leaned back in his chair. The springs creaked. She is under the radar. But just barely, he said. The system flagged it. But she has enough pull on the board to keep the audit suppressed. She has been overriding the flags. But this seeing her drop you off here? He shook his head, a look of disgust crossing his face. She is using a car paid for by the homeless to drive her own homeless daughter to a shelter. He said, that is a level of irony that I cannot stomach. I sat there, staring at the glowing screen. The numbers didn't lie. I knew numbers. I had spent 7 years at Redwood Ledger Solutions finding buried truths in spreadsheets. I looked at the dates. I looked at the amounts. I saw the pattern immediately. It wasn't just a few tanks of gas. It was systemic embezzlement disguised as philanthropy. My mother wasn't just a cruel woman. She was a criminal, and she was stealing from the very people she had just condemned me to join. Caleb turned to look at me. His eyes were intense. I have the records. Ella. But I am just a shelter director. If I make a noise, she will crush me. She will say it is a clerical error. She will say I am incompetent. She has lawyers. He paused. But you? You are her daughter. You know the players. You know the brother-in-law. You just identified the shell company. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. I can give you a bed tonight. I can give you food. We will keep Mia safe. But you just handed me the missing piece of a puzzle I have been trying to solve for months. He gestured to the screen. This flag? It is the thread. If we pull it, the whole thing unravels. I looked at the red text. Pending review. I looked at Mia, who was squeezing the yellow star stress ball, oblivious to the fact that her grandmother was stealing the money that should have been buying beds for kids like her. I thought about the cold sidewalk. I thought about the way my mother had looked at me through the glass. This place is for failures. No. Mother. I thought, this place is for the truth. I looked back at Caleb. I felt a steel rod stiffen in my spine, a sensation I hadn't felt in weeks. The fear was still there, but it was being pushed aside by a cold, sharp anger. What do you need me to do? I asked. Caleb smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a man who finally has ammunition. I need you to help me build the case, he said. Tonight. You rest. But tomorrow? Tomorrow we start an audit of our own. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a key. Room 4B, he said. It is small, but the door locks, and nobody can kick you out. I took the key. It felt heavy in my hand. It felt like a weapon. Thank you. Caleb, I said. I stood up and took Mia's hand. We walked out of the office and down the hall toward the dormitory. For the first time since I lost my job. I didn't feel like I was falling. I felt like I had landed, and now that my feet were on the ground, I was ready to fight back. The morning sun that filtered through the barred window of room 4B was gray and weak, doing little to warm the cinder block walls. I had barely slept. Every time the hallway floorboards creaked, or a door slammed in the distance, I jerked awake, my arm instinctively tightening around Mia. She was still asleep, her breath creating a small rhythm that was the only peaceful thing in my world. I was sitting on the edge of the narrow twin mattress, fully dressed, when my phone buzzed against the hard plastic of the bedside table. It was 9 o'clock in the morning. The number on the screen was local, but not one I recognized. I picked it up, expecting it to be a bill collector or maybe, just maybe, a callback from one of the 100 jobs I had applied to. Hello? I answered, keeping my voice low so I would not wake Mia. Ms. Ward? A male voice asked. It was smooth, professional, and dripping with that false courtesy lawyers use right before they gut you. This is Arthur Sterling. I am representing the Kessler Ward Family Trust. My stomach turned over. They were not wasting any time. I have nothing to say to you, I said, moving to hang up. Please do not hang up. Ms. Ward, he said quickly, I am calling with a solution. Your mother and sister are very concerned about your current living situation. They want to help you resolve this amicably. I nearly laughed out loud. Amicably? That was a rich word for a family that had left a 5-year-old on a curb in freezing temperatures. What do you want? I asked. We are prepared to offer you a one-time cash settlement, Sterling said, in exchange for your signature transferring the deed of the Iron Heights duplex to the trust. The family is willing to cut you a check for $20,000, immediate payment. You could have the money in your account by noon. $20,000. I felt the blood rush to my face. The duplex, even in its disrepair, was in a neighborhood that was slowly gentrifying. It was worth at least $250,000 on the open market. Once fixed up, it would be worth nearly double that. They were offering me pennies on the dollar. They were trying to buy my inheritance for the price of a used car. That is insulting, I hissed. That property is worth 10 times that amount. In its current state? Sterling countered, his voice losing some of its warmth. It is a liability, Ms. Ward. It has code violations. It has tax liens pending. And frankly, given your current position, you are not in a place to negotiate. $20,000 is a lot of money for someone residing in a homeless shelter. It would allow you to rent an apartment. It would provide stability for your daughter. There it was, the leverage. He was using my poverty as a weapon. I am not signing. I said firmly, tell Grant he can find his collateral somewhere else. There was a pause on the line. When Sterling spoke again, the pleasant veneer was gone. Ms. Ward, I would strongly advise you to reconsider. Litigation is incredibly expensive. If the trust decides to sue for partition or challenge the competency of the original bequest, you will be buried in legal fees you cannot afford. And let us be honest, a judge is going to look very skeptically at a homeless woman holding on to a dilapidated asset while her child sleeps in a shelter. It is not a good look. Are you threatening to take me to court? I asked, my hand gripping the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. I am just explaining the reality of the situation. He said, we will give you until the end of the business day to accept the offer. After that, the offer is rescinded, and we proceed with other measures. He hung up. I stared at the phone, my heart hammering against my ribs. They were trying to bully me. They thought that because I was down, they could kick me until I let go of the only thing I had left. 10 minutes later, the phone rang again. This time, the caller ID said, Sloan. I debated not answering. I didn't want to hear her voice. But I needed to know what angle they were playing. I needed to know how desperate they were. I swiped the green button. Ella? Sloane's voice came through, thick with tears. Oh, thank God you picked up. She sounded hysterical. If I didn't know her better, I might have felt sorry for her. What is it? Sloan? I asked, keeping my voice flat. You have to help us. She sobbed. You have to sign the papers. You do not understand how bad it is. Bad for who? I asked. For Grant? Grant is in over his head. Ella, she cried. The investors are pulling out. If he does not secure this bridge loan by Friday, the company goes under. We could lose everything. The house, the cars, the club memberships, everything. I sat there, listening to her list the potential tragedies of her life. Losing a club membership, losing a luxury car. I am at a homeless shelter. Sloan, I said, cutting through her wailing. Mom dropped me and your niece off on the sidewalk last night. Do you want to talk to me about losing things? There was a momentary silence on the other end, but Sloan recovered quickly. I know, she said, her voice dropping to a frantic whisper. And that is terrible, really. But Mom thinks she is teaching you a lesson. You know how she is. But this is different. Ella, this is about the family survival. If you sign the paper, Grant can fix everything. He will give you money. More than the lawyer offered. I promise. Just save us. Ella, please. You are my sister. I closed my eyes. Family. They only used that word when they needed a kidney or a signature. I cannot do it. Sloan. I said, Grandpa gave that house to me. It is Mia's future. I am not setting fire to my daughter's future to keep Grant warm. Sloane's crying stopped abruptly. It was like a switch had been flipped. The vulnerability vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp edge that sounded exactly like our mother. You are being incredibly selfish, she snapped. I am being a mother, I said. Are you? Sloane asked. Her voice was soft now. Dangerous. Because a good mother wouldn't be dragging her child through a shelter system. A good mother would provide a home. I felt a chill run down my spine. I knew where this was going. What are you saying? I asked. I'm just saying, Sloane murmured, that people are worried. Grant is worried. Mom is worried. We are all wondering if you are really capable of taking care of Mia right now. I mean, living in a place like that? With those people? It is not safe. Ella, if the authorities found out if Child Protective Services knew that Mia was in an unstable environment, well, they might think she would be safer with family who can actually provide for her. My blood ran cold. The air left the room. Are you threatening to take my daughter? I whispered. I'm just trying to help you make the right choice, Sloane said lightly. If you sign the papers, you get the money, you get an apartment, and everyone is happy. If you don't, well, we just want what is best for Mia. We would hate for her to be removed from your custody because you were too stubborn to cooperate. I felt a wave of nausea so strong I almost gagged. This was not just business anymore. This was extortion. Don't you dare, I said, my voice shaking with rage. Think about it. Ella, Sloane said, you have until 5 o'clock. She hung up. I dropped the phone on the mattress. I felt like I was going to be sick. They were willing to call social services on me. They were willing to traumatize Mia, to rip her away from me, just to get their hands on a piece of real estate. I looked at Mia. She was stirring, rubbing her eyes with her fist. Mommy? She mumbled. Can we have pancakes? I forced myself to breathe. I forced the panic down into a tight ball in my stomach. I don't know about pancakes, baby, I said, smoothing her hair. But we will find some breakfast. I spent the next hour in a daze of anxiety. I helped Mia get dressed. I walked her to the small cafeteria area for oatmeal. I kept looking at the door, expecting the police or social workers to burst in at any moment. At 10:30, Caleb found me. I was sitting at a corner table, watching Mia color in a coloring book. Caleb walked over, his face grim. He held a clipboard in his hand. Ella, he said quietly, can I speak to you for a second? I looked up at him, and I knew. I could see it in his eyes. They called. Didn't they? I asked. Caleb pulled out a chair and sat down. He didn't look at Mia. He looked straight at me. We just received a notification through the central intake system. He said, a concern has been flagged regarding a resident, a minor child. Mia, I felt the room spin. It had barely been an hour since Sloane's call. What does it say? I asked, my voice hollow. It is a priority flag, Caleb said, glancing at the paper. It alleges that the child is being housed in unsafe conditions and that the parent is showing signs of mental instability and financial negligence. It requests an immediate welfare check. Mental instability. They were painting me as crazy. It is a lie. I said, you know it is a lie. I know, Caleb said firmly. But Ella, once a flag is in the system, we have to follow protocol. A caseworker from the city is already on their way. They have to do a site visit. I felt tears pricking my eyes. Not tears of sadness, but tears of pure, helpless frustration. They are doing this to force me to sign over my grandfather's house. I said, my sister told me. She said if I didn't sign, they would come for Mia. Caleb's jaw tightened. He looked at the paperwork again. The caseworker will be here in 20 minutes. He said, listen to me. You have nothing to hide. Mia is fed. She is clean. She is loved. You are sober. You are actively seeking employment. Poverty is not a crime, and it is not grounds for removal. You just stay calm. Answer their questions. I will stay with you." 20 minutes later, the social worker arrived. Her name was Mrs. Higgins. She was a stern woman with glasses on a chain, carrying a thick binder. My heart hammered against my ribs the entire time. I showed her our room. I showed her the small stash of snacks I had bought. I showed her Mia's clean clothes. She asked Mia questions. "Do you feel safe here? Does Mommy yell at you? Did you have dinner last night?" Mia answered with the brutal honesty of a 5-year-old. "Mommy is sad because Grandma was mean." Mia said, "But we are playing camping. And Caleb gave me hot chocolate." Mrs. Higgins took notes. She looked at me, scrutinizing my face, my hands, my posture. I sat as still as a statue, terrified that if I twitched, she would write down nervous tick. Finally, she closed her binder. "She looks healthy," Mrs. Higgins said. "And while a shelter is not ideal, you are utilizing the resources available to you. I see no immediate danger requiring removal." I let out a breath that felt like it had been held for a year. "Thank you," I whispered. Mrs. Higgins stood up to leave, but before she walked out, she paused. She looked at her file, then at me. Her expression softened. Just a fraction. "Ms. Ward, I am not supposed to share details about the source of a report," she said. "It is anonymous." I waited. "However," she continued, lowering her voice, "this report came in with a high-priority code, a code usually reserved for mandated reporters or agency partners. It didn't come from a neighbor or a family member calling the hotline. It was entered directly into the database from a partner terminal." I frowned. "A partner terminal?" "Specifically," she said, glancing at Caleb. "It originated from the administrative network of the Beacon Harbor Relief Fund." She gave me a meaningful look, then turned and walked out the door. I stood there, frozen. The Beacon Harbor Relief Fund. The same charity where my mother sat on the steering committee. The same charity she was stealing from. She hadn't just called the hotline like a concerned grandmother. She had used her access, her professional access to the social services system, to file a false report against her own daughter. She had weaponized the very network meant to help people like me. Caleb was standing by the door. He had heard it too. He walked over and closed the door to the office. Locking it, that was the mistake, he said. His voice was low and hard. I looked at him. "What do you mean?" If she had called anonymously, "We couldn't prove anything." Caleb said, "But she used her login, or she had someone use a login associated with her board seat. She used the charity system to harass a shelter resident." He walked over to his computer and woke up the screen. "She is not just trying to pressure you, Ella. She is abusing her power. She is using the system to hunt you." I sat down in the chair, my legs giving out. I thought about the lawyer. I thought about Sloane's tears. I thought about the cold, calculated way my mother had orchestrated this entire morning. They were a coordinated strike force. They didn't care about Mia. They didn't care about me. They only cared about the money, and they were willing to traumatize a 5-year-old girl to get it. A cold calm settled over me. It was different from the fear I had felt earlier. It was heavy and solid. It was the feeling of hitting the bottom and realizing there is solid rock beneath your feet to push off of. "I am done running," I said. Caleb looked at me. He stopped typing. "I am done crying, and I am done begging." I said, "They want a war? They want to talk about records and audits and legalities? Fine." I looked at Caleb. "You said you wanted to stop her. You said you wanted to expose what she is doing with the funds." "I do," Caleb said. I pointed at his computer. "Then let us do it. I don't want to just defend myself anymore. I want to go on the offense." Caleb nodded slowly. A look of respect crossed his face. "We do this by the book," he said. "No screaming matches, no blackmail. We build a forensic case so tight that when we drop it, they won't be able to breathe." He pulled up a fresh document on his screen. "If we are going to do this, I need you to use that auditor brain of yours," Caleb said. "I can access the records, but I need you to connect the dots. I need you to find the smoking gun that links your brother-in-law's debts to your mother's withdrawals. I pulled my chair closer to the desk. I looked at the glowing numbers on the screen. It was a mess of transactions, codes, and shell accounts, but to me, it looked like a map. I am ready, I said. Caleb handed me a stack of printed spreadsheets. Then let us get to work, he said. Outside, the winter wind was howling against the brick walls of the shelter, but inside that small office, the heat was rising. My mother had started a fire hoping to burn me out. She didn't realize she had just handed me the torch. Caleb laid a thick binder on the desk between us. It landed with a heavy thud that seemed to shake the small office. The cover was worn, the plastic peeling at the corners. But the title was clear: Bylaws and Charter of the Beacon Harbor Relief Fund. He opened it to page 42 and pointed to a paragraph highlighted in yellow. Here is our weapon. Ella, he said. I leaned in to read. The text was dense legalese, but my eyes cut through the jargon. It was an oversight clause. It stated that any founding member or director of a beneficiary shelter had the right to demand an immediate third-party forensic audit if there was substantial evidence of financial malfeasance. Caleb tapped the page. I am not just an employee, he said. I was one of the original signatories when this network was built 20 years ago. They forgot that. Marianne thinks I am just the janitor who keeps the lights on. But I have the power to freeze their assets if I can prove they are leaking money. The problem is the proof. I said, the license plate is strong, but it is circumstantial. She could claim it was a loaner vehicle. She could claim she was doing shelter business. We need the paper trail. We need to see where the money went before it turned into a car. Caleb nodded. He reached for his phone. That is why I called Lydia. He said, Lydia Crow was the secretary for the fund's steering committee. I knew the name, but I had never met her. In my mind, she was just a signature at the bottom of form letters. 40 minutes later, we met her, not at the shelter, and not at a coffee shop where we might be seen. We met her in the back row of the public library, 3 blocks over. It was quiet, smelling of old paper and dust. Lydia was a woman in her 50s who looked like she was holding herself together with safety pins. Her coat was buttoned wrong. Her hands were trembling as she clutched a large tote bag. When she saw me, her eyes widened in recognition. You are the daughter, she whispered. You look just like her. I am nothing like her, I said. Lydia let out a nervous, bird-like laugh. No, I suppose not. If you were like her, you would not be sitting here with us. You would be yelling at me because your sparkling water was room temperature. She sat down, placing the bag on the table. She looked terrified. If she finds out I'm here, Lydia said, looking at Caleb, if she knows I gave you this, she will ruin me. She knows everyone in this town. I will never work again. Lydia, Caleb said gently, if we do not stop this, there will not be a fund left to work for. You said yourself the accounts are bleeding. Lydia nodded jerkily. She reached into her bag and pulled out a stack of manila folders. I printed these before I left the office today, she said. I deleted the print logs. But you need to be careful. She slid the first folder toward me. This is the approval chain for the SUV, she said. I opened it. It was an email thread. The subject line was urgent. Community transport acquisition. I read the emails. The request for the vehicle did not come from a shelter director. It came from Marianne Ward. She had written a justification claiming that the fund needed a high-visibility mobile unit for donor outreach and VIP transport. I flipped to the invoice. The dealer was a luxury import specialist. The price tag was $84,000. But here was the smoking gun. The delivery instructions. Deliver to 4402 Crestview Lane, Glenmere Heights. That was my mother's home address. And look at the registration request, Lydia whispered, pointing to a sticky note on a photocopy of the title application. The note was in my mother's handwriting. It read, Register as fleet vehicle / tax exempt. Keep keys with M. W. I looked up at Caleb. This is theft, I said. It is straight-up theft disguised as operations. Keep looking, Lydia said. That is just the car. The car is the crumb. The cake is the consulting fees. I opened the second folder. It was thick with invoices. I started scanning them, my auditor brain shifting into high gear. I looked for patterns. I looked for recurring vendors. November 1st, $12,000. Strategic Brand Consulting. October 15th, $8,500. Event Logistics and Management. September 30th, $10,000. Media Outreach Retainer. All of them were payable to the same vendor, Apex Solutions Group. I had never heard of Apex Solutions Group. I looked at the address on the invoice. It was a P.O. box in a strip mall on the other side of the city. Who is Apex? I asked. Lydia shook her head. I don't know. They are a preferred vendor. Marianne pushed them through the approval process 6 months ago. She said they were essential for the upcoming Winter Gala. She waived the competitive bidding process because she said it was an emergency. I looked at the invoices again. The formatting looked familiar. The font was standard, but there was a specific way the dates were written. Day, then month, then year. It was a quirk I had seen before. I pulled out my phone and logged into my old cloud account. I searched for emails from my brother-in-law, Grant. He had sent me a business proposal years ago, trying to get me to invest in his logistics company. I found the old PDF. I zoomed in on the invoice template he had used for his projections. It was a match. The layout, the font, the date format, even the logo placement was identical, just with a different name pasted on top. It is Grant, I said. The realization sat in my stomach like a stone. Apex Solutions is a shell company. Grant is billing the charity for services he is not providing, and Mom is approving the invoices. I did the math in my head. 12,000 here, 8,000 there, over 6 months. It added up to nearly $100,000. Grant's company is drowning in debt, I said. Looking at Caleb, Sloan told me he needed a bridge loan. They are not waiting for a loan. They are looting the charity to pay his creditors. And the car? Caleb asked. The car is just a perk, I said. Or maybe it is a bonus payment Mom took for herself for facilitating the theft. I took out a piece of notebook paper and started drawing a timeline. I plotted the dates of the invoices against the dates of my own life. The first big withdrawal to Apex happened 2 days after Sloan bought her new car. The second withdrawal happened the week Grant's warehouse lease was due. The final, largest invoice was dated 3 days ago. That was the day I called my mother for help. I stared at the paper. She knew, I whispered. When I called her, she knew they had just drained the accounts. That is why she was so desperate for me to sign over the duplex. They did not just need collateral for a loan. They needed to plug the hole in the fund before the end-of-year audit. Caleb looked at the timeline. The Winter Gala is in 2 days. He said, that is their deadline. They need to show that the money was spent on the event. If the event happens and the books look balanced, they get away with it. They wash the money clean. We cannot let that happen. I said. Lydia suddenly stood up. Her phone was buzzing. She looked at the screen and her face went gray. It is Marianne, she gasped. She is asking why I am not at my desk. She grabbed her bag. I have to go, she said. I cannot be seen. Lydia. Wait, Caleb said. Will you testify? If we call for the audit, will you stand up and confirm these documents are real? Lydia looked at us. Her eyes were swimming with tears. I have a mortgage, she said. I have a sick husband. If I speak out, she will destroy us. She knows people, dangerous people. She backed away. I cannot do it, she said. I am sorry. She turned and ran out of the library stacks, disappearing toward the exit. We lost her, Caleb said, running a hand through his hair. Without her testimony, they will claim these documents are forgeries. They will say we stole them or faked them. I looked at the stack of papers. They were copies. Copies could be challenged. Wait, I said. My phone chimed. A notification from my email. New message from L_Crow_private. I opened it. There was no subject line, just an attachment, a zipped folder. I tapped it open. It was the digital files, not PDFs, the original email source files. The metadata was intact. She sent them. I said, feeling a surge of hope. She is too scared to talk, but she sent the proof. I opened the properties of the first file. Created by G. Kessler, modified by M. Ward. It was digital DNA. They couldn't scrub this. Not if we moved fast. We have what we need. I said. Caleb looked at the phone, then at me. They are going to try to bury this before the gala. He said. They will shred the physical copies. They will wipe the servers. But they cannot wipe this. We went back to the shelter. I felt like I was carrying a grenade in my pocket. When we got back to the office, there was a large, cream-colored envelope sitting on the desk. It looked completely out of place against the scarred wood and the stacks of intake forms. What is this? I asked. A courier dropped it off 10 minutes ago. The receptionist said, For you, Ella. I picked it up. The paper was thick, expensive. My name was written in calligraphy. Ms. Ella Ward. I opened it. Inside was a heavy card with gold foil lettering. The Board of Directors cordially invites you to the annual Stonebridge Winter Benefit. It was an invitation to the gala. The same gala they were using to launder the stolen money. A small, handwritten note fell out of the envelope. I recognized the sharp, angular script immediately. It was my mother's handwriting. I picked it up and read it. Ella, come to the gala. Bring Mia. Let her see what a good life looks like. Let her see where she belongs. I have a dress for you. Sign the papers, and you can leave with us. Refuse, and you stay in the cold forever. Mother, I stared at the note. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from clarity. She wants a show, I said softly. Caleb looked at the note. It is a PR trap, he said. She wants you there so she can parade you around, the prodigal daughter returning to the fold. If you show up and sign the papers. She looks like a savior. She saves her daughter from homelessness, and she saves Grant's company with your asset. She wins everything. And if I don't show up? I asked. Then she spins the story. Caleb said, She tells everyone she tried. She tells them you are unstable, that you refused her help. She plays the victim. I looked at the invitation. Stonebridge Winter Benefit. It was the biggest event of the season. The mayor would be there. The press would be there. All of her wealthy friends would be there. She thinks she is inviting a victim, I said. I looked at Caleb. I thought about the files on my phone. I thought about the red status line on her donor profile. I thought about Mia asking why Grandma was mad. She wants the spotlight. I said, She wants everyone to look at her. I crumpled the note in my fist. Fine, I said. We will give her the stage. Caleb raised an eyebrow. You are going? He asked. I am going, I said, and I'm bringing Mia, not to sign her papers, but to show everyone exactly who Marianne Ward really is. I looked at the timeline I had drawn, the dates, the amounts, the lies. We are going to crash that party. Caleb, I said, and we are going to bring the receipts. But we have to be smart, Caleb warned. If they see us coming, they will have security throw us out before we can open our mouths. They won't see us coming. I said, because they think I am broken. They think I'm coming to kneel. I picked up the invitation and smoothed it out. They have no idea that I'm coming to drop the curtain on their entire show. The donation bin at the shelter smelled of lavender detergent and other people's lives. It was a large plastic tub in the basement, filled with clothes that had been discarded by those who had too much for those who had nothing. I dug through layers of faded denim and stretched out t-shirts until my fingers brushed against something soft. It was a navy blue velvet dress. It had a white lace collar and a small ribbon at the waist. It was slightly worn at the elbows, and when I held it up, I could tell it was a size too big for Mia. But it was beautiful. It was dignified. I found a pair of black tights that were still in their package, and a pair of patent leather shoes that looked like they had only been worn once. This is for the party? Mia asked, touching the velvet with reverence. Yes, baby, I said. We are going to a party to see Grandma. I found my own armor in the back of my suitcase. It was the black suit I had worn to my interview at Redwood Ledger Solutions 7 years ago. It was a bit loose now. Stress had eaten away at my appetite and my waistline, but it was clean. I ironed the white shirt in the laundry room, pressing the steam button until the hiss drowned out the doubts in my head. I did not want to look like a charity case. I did not want to look like the poor relation coming to beg for scraps. I wanted to look like what I was: a professional, an auditor, a woman who deals in facts, not feelings. While Mia struggled into the tights, sticking her tongue out in concentration, I sat her down on the edge of the cot. The room was quiet, save for the hum of the radiator. I needed her to understand something, but I could not tell her the whole ugly truth. I could not tell her that her grandmother was a thief. "Mia, look at me," I said. She looked up, one shoe dangling from her foot. "Tonight. People might say things," I said, choosing my words with the precision of a surgeon. "They might act like we do not belong there. Or Grandma might seem upset." "Is she still mad at me?" Mia asked, her voice small. I took her hands in mine. Her fingers were so small, so perfect. "No," I said firmly. "And this is the most important rule for tonight. If a grown-up does something wrong, or if a grown-up is angry, it is never, ever the fault of a child. Do you understand? You are good. You are perfect. If Grandma is acting strange, it is because she has a problem inside her heart, not because of anything you did." Mia thought about this for a second, processing it with 5-year-old logic. "Like when Timmy throws sand at the playground?" she asked. "That is Timmy's problem?" "Exactly," I said. "That is Timmy's problem. And tonight, we are just going to watch. We are going to be brave." Caleb knocked on the door an hour later. He was wearing a suit that looked like it had been in the back of a closet for a decade, smelling faintly of cedar and dust, but he wore it with an authority that made the fabric irrelevant. "I made the calls," he said. Stepping into the small room, he pulled a notepad from his pocket. "I spoke to Judge Holloway. He is retired now, but he sits on the ethics committee of the board. And I spoke to Mrs. Gable. She is 80 years old and has been the largest private donor to the fund for 30 years. And?" I asked, my heart beating a little faster. "They are listening," Caleb said. "They have had their suspicions. Apparently, Grant has been trying to network with them at mixers, asking clumsy questions about liquidity and loans. They didn't like it. But they are old school. Ella, they respect the hierarchy. They won't move against Marianne unless the evidence is undeniable. It will be." I said. Caleb looked at me. "If we do this, if we walk into that ballroom and drop this bomb, there is no going back. You understand that? You are not just burning a bridge. You are blowing up the canyon." "I know." I said. "I need you to practice," he said. "Practice what?" "Your testimony," he said. "When we confront them, they will try to make it emotional. Marianne will cry. She will scream. She will talk about how much she sacrificed for you. If you get angry, if you scream back, we lose. You look like the ungrateful, unstable daughter. You have to be ice." So we rehearsed, in that tiny room with cinder block walls. I stood in front of Caleb and delivered the facts of my mother's betrayal as if I were reading a quarterly earnings report. On November 4th, $12,000 was transferred to Apex Solutions. I recited, my voice steady. The invoice was for strategic consulting. The metadata shows the invoice was created by Grant Kessler on a laptop registered to the Kessler Logistics Group. "Again," Caleb said. "Make it flatter. Take the anger out. Just the numbers." I did it again, and again, until the words felt like stones in my mouth. Heavy, solid, and unbreakable. Then came the twist that nearly broke my resolve. It was late afternoon. I was going through the digital files one last time, cross-referencing the vendor names with public records on my phone, just to be absolutely sure. I decided to search my mother's name in the state's charitable database, looking for any other boards she might have sat on. I found an old record from 10 years ago. It was for a small arts foundation in the next county. I clicked on the file. It was a scanned PDF of a board meeting minute. "Motion to accept the resignation of Marianne Ward," it read. I scrolled down. There was a footnote, barely legible in the scan. Internal review regarding allocation of catering budget suspended upon resignation. No further action taken. I froze. Catering budget. I dug deeper. I found a forum post from a local community group from that same year, discussing rumors about why the Arts Foundation had suddenly scaled back its programs. A user had commented, "Too much money went to parties that never happened." My blood ran cold. This wasn't a new behavior. This wasn't just her trying to help Grant out of a tight spot. This was her. She had done this before. She had skimmed money from a charity 10 years ago, got caught, and was allowed to resign quietly to save face because she knew the right people. She had just moved on to a bigger target, the Beacon Harbor Relief Fund, and waited until she felt safe enough to start again. This wasn't a mistake. It was a pathology. I showed Caleb. He looked at the screen, his jaw tightening. "She is a predator," he said softly. "She feeds on status. And she uses other people's money to buy it." This realization hit me harder than the theft itself. I had spent my life thinking my mother was just hard on me, that she was a perfectionist who wanted the best for her family, but she wasn't. She was a fraud. The luxury, the cars, the respect. It was all built on a hollow foundation of other people's goodwill. That night, the night before the gala, I couldn't sleep. The room was dark, but the street lamp outside cast long, prison bar shadows across the floor. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The silence was heavy. Doubt started to creep in, whispering in the dark. "She is your mother. She paid for your college. She bought you your first car. Maybe you can just threaten her? Maybe you can make her pay it back without destroying her in public?" I thought about the humiliation. I thought about the police. I thought about seeing my mother in handcuffs. It made my stomach churn. Was I really the kind of person who could do that to the woman who gave birth to me? I turned over, burying my face in the pillow. I felt like a traitor. Then, I heard Mia turn in her sleep. She let out a small sigh. I looked over at her. In the dim light, I could see her clutching her rabbit. She was sleeping on a shelter cot, wrapped in a scratchy wool blanket, because my mother, a woman with millions in assets, had decided to teach us a lesson. I replayed the moment on the curb, the window rolling down, the warm air from the car hitting my cold face. "This place is for failures." That was the sentence. That was the key. She didn't just leave us. She enjoyed it. She felt superior doing it. To her, love was not a bond. It was a transaction. And if you couldn't pay the price, which was total submission, you were discarded. If I let her get away with this, if I signed those papers or just kept quiet, I would be teaching Mia that it is okay for people to hurt you as long as they are family. I would be teaching her that love comes with a chokehold. I sat up in bed. The guilt evaporated. It was replaced by a cold, clear clarity. I was not doing this for revenge. I was doing this for boundaries. I was doing this to show Mia that you do not have to set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. The next morning, the day of the gala, the shelter was buzzing. It was a Saturday. The air was crisp and cold. I showered and put on my suit. I did my hair in a tight bun, severe and professional. I put on a little bit of makeup, just enough to hide the dark circles, not enough to look festive. Mia put on her blue velvet dress. She spun around in the center of the room. "Do I look like a princess?" she asked. "You look like a queen," I said. We packed our single suitcase. I was not planning on coming back to the shelter, but I was not going back to my mother's house either. I didn't know where we would sleep that night. Maybe a motel. Maybe Caleb would help us find a safe house. But we were leaving this room. As we were about to walk out the door, Mia stopped. She ran back to her cot and grabbed her stuffed rabbit. It was gray, with one ear hanging by a thread. She walked over to me and held it out. "Here, Mommy," she said. "What is this for?" I asked. "For you," she said solemnly. "Bunny is brave. He can help you be brave too." I felt tears prick my eyes. Hot and sudden, I took the worn-out toy. It smelled like her, like strawberry shampoo and innocence. "Thank you," I whispered. "I will put him in my bag." He will be our secret weapon. I put the rabbit in my large tote bag, right next to the file folder containing the printed emails and the timeline of the theft. My phone buzzed. It was Sloan. "Ella, please tell me you are coming. Mom is asking. The notary is here. Just come and sign and this is all over." I looked at the message. I could hear her desperation. I could hear the wheels of their machine grinding, waiting to crush me. I didn't reply. I went into my settings. I scrolled down to Sloane's number. I pressed block caller. Then I did the same for Grant. And finally, for Marianne Ward. The silence that followed was profound. For the first time in my life, I had cut the cord. I wasn't waiting for their permission. I wasn't waiting for their approval. I picked up our bag. "Let's go," I said. We walked out to the street. Caleb was waiting for us. He had called a taxi. It wasn't a limo. It was a beat-up yellow sedan with a cracked bumper. We piled in. The seats were covered in vinyl that stuck to my suit. "Where to?" the driver asked, chewing on a toothpick. "The Stonebridge estate?" Caleb said. "The main ballroom entrance." The driver raised an eyebrow in the rearview mirror, looking at our mismatched group. A tired man in an old suit, a woman with a suitcase, and a little girl in a velvet dress. "Whatever you say, boss," he said. The drive took 40 minutes. We moved from the gray industrial district, through the bustling city center, and out toward the wealthy enclaves of the north side. The houses got bigger, the gates got taller. As we approached the Stonebridge estate, the traffic slowed. A line of black limousines and luxury SUVs stretched down the driveway. The estate was magnificent. It was a sprawling stone mansion lit by hundreds of spotlights. The snow on the lawn sparkled like diamonds. It looked like a fairy tale. It looked like the kind of place where nothing bad could ever happen. Our yellow taxi idled behind a Rolls-Royce. I looked out the window. I saw women in glittering gowns stepping out of cars, their breath puffing in the cold air. I saw men in tuxedos laughing, slapping each other on the back. It was a world I had grown up on the edge of, a world I was supposed to aspire to. But looking at it now, from the back of a taxi with my life packed in a suitcase, it looked like a stage set. It was flimsy. It was fake. My mother was in there, holding court. She was probably holding a glass of champagne, telling people how much she did for the community. Accepting their praise while she wore clothes bought with money meant for hungry children. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. I felt a strange, icy calm. "Are you ready?" Caleb asked, looking at me. I reached into my bag and touched the soft ear of Mia's rabbit. I touched the sharp edge of the file folder. I looked at the glowing entrance of the ballroom. "They think they are the only ones who know how to play the game," I said. I opened the door of the taxi. "Let us go show them the score." The Stonebridge ballroom was the assault on the senses. After days of living in the gray, muted world of the shelter, the gala felt like stepping into the center of a supernova. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the ceiling, casting a fractured, golden light over everything. The air was thick with the scent of lilies, roasting prime rib, and the specific, metallic tang of expensive perfume. A string quartet was playing Vivaldi in the corner, but the music was barely audible over the roar of polite conversation and the clinking of champagne flutes. I held Mia's hand so tight, I was afraid I might hurt her. She was staring wide-eyed at a tower of macarons, her free hand clutching the worn-out gray rabbit against her blue velvet dress. We walked through the entrance, and I felt the eyes of the room slide over us, in my old black suit and Mia's slightly too large dress. We didn't look like guests. We looked like a charity project that had wandered off the brochure. And there she was. My mother, Marianne Ward, was standing near the center of the room, holding court beneath the largest chandelier. She was wearing a silver gown that shimmered like liquid mercury. Her hair was perfectly coiffed, her makeup flawless. She was laughing at something a man in a tuxedo was saying, her head thrown back in a gesture of practiced delight. She looked radiant. She looked like a saint. She spotted us. For a fraction of a second, her smile faltered. A flicker of annoyance crossed her face, sharp and fast. But then, The mask slid back into place. Her expression shifted from annoyance to a performative, overwhelming relief. She excused herself from her circle and glided toward us, arms outstretched. "Ella!" she cried out. Her voice was pitched perfectly to carry over the din of the crowd. "You made it!" Heads turned. Conversations paused. My mother reached us and enveloped me in a hug that felt like being squeezed by a python. Her perfume was suffocating. "I am so glad you came to your senses," she hissed into my ear, her voice low and hard. "You look tired. Fix your hair." She pulled back. Beaming at the onlookers, she looked down at Mia and my beautiful granddaughter. She cooed, reaching out to touch Mia's cheek. Mia flinched. Stepping behind my leg, Marianne's hand hovered in the air for a second, before she smoothly converted the gesture into a wave to a passing waiter. "Come," she said, linking her arm through mine. "Let's get you settled. The family is over here." She steered me not to a private corner, but to a high-top table right near the stage. It was a high-visibility spot. Grant and Sloane were already there. Grant looked like he was sweating through his tuxedo. His eyes were darting around the room, checking the exits. Sloane was drinking a martini as if it were water. When they saw me, their shoulders dropped. They thought I had come to surrender. "Thank you for coming." "Ella," Grant said, his voice shaky. "Really? You saved us." Sloane stepped forward and kissed my cheek. Her lips were cold. "I knew you would do the right thing," she whispered. "For Mia." Marianne wasted no time. She reached into her silver clutch and pulled out a folded document. She placed it on the table, right next to a centerpiece of white roses. Beside it, she placed a gold fountain pen. "Let us get this done so we can enjoy the evening," Marianne said, her voice dripping with maternal concern. I looked down. It was the deed transfer. And underneath it, just peeking out, was a cashier's check. I could see the number 20 followed by 3 zeros. "Just sign right there." "Darling," Marianne said, raising her voice slightly so the couple at the next table could hear. "We just want to make sure you and Mia are taken care of. The family trust is going to handle everything. You won't have to worry about those repairs anymore." She was framing it as a rescue. She was the benevolent matriarch saving her incompetent daughter from the burden of property ownership. I picked up the pen. Grant let out a breath he must have been holding for a week. Sloane smiled, her eyes tearing up. I held the pen in my hand. It was heavy, expensive. I looked at the document. I looked at the check. Then I looked at my mother. "You think this buys you silence?" I asked quietly. Marianne's smile froze. "What are you talking about?" "Sign the paper." "Ella, people are watching." "I know they are watching." I said, "That is the point." I set the pen down on the table. I did not sign. Grant's eyes bulged. "Ella, don't do this. Not here." Sloane moved closer, her voice turning into a hiss. "Do not embarrass us. Think about Mia. Do you want her sleeping in a shelter again tonight? Because if you walk away from this, that is exactly where she is going. And I will make sure the social worker knows you turned down a $20,000 lifeline." It was the same threat, the same leverage, but this time, I wasn't alone. From the shadows near the stage, Caleb Hartman stepped forward. He walked up the 3 steps to the platform where the band was playing. He didn't look like he belonged there in his old suit, but he moved with a purpose that silenced the musicians. He walked straight to the microphone stand. "Excuse me," he said. His voice boomed through the speakers, causing a screech of feedback that made everyone in the room wince. The room went silent. Waiters stopped with trays of champagne. The laughter died down. Marianne spun around, her eyes narrowing. "Who is that? Get him off the stage." Grant turned pale. "That is the shelter director," he whispered. Caleb adjusted the mic. He looked out at the sea of diamonds and tuxedos. Then he looked down at our table. "Good evening, everyone," Caleb said. "My name is Caleb Hartman. I am one of the founding signatories of the Beacon Harbor Relief Fund." A ripple of confusion went through the crowd. They knew the fund, but they didn't know him. "I am sorry to interrupt the festivities," Caleb continued, his voice steady and grave. "But Article 4 of our charter states, that a founding member has a duty to intervene when the integrity of the mission is compromised. Marianne took a step toward the stage. "This is inappropriate," she shouted, her voice shrill. "Security!" Caleb ignored her. He pulled a piece of paper from his pocket. "Tonight, we are celebrating generosity," Caleb said. "We are celebrating the money raised to help the homeless. But I'm afraid I have to ask a question. Where is that money actually going?" He held up the paper. "I have here a vehicle registration for a luxury SUV, purchased 6 months ago with funds earmarked for patient transport." Caleb said, "The cost was $84,000. The license plate is MWARD. A gasp went through the room. People turned to look at Marianne. She was frozen, her face a mask of shock and rage. "That vehicle is not transporting the homeless," Caleb said. "It is parked in the driveway of a board member, and last night it was used to drop off that board member's own daughter and granddaughter at my shelter." While the driver drove home to a warm bed, Marianne laughed. It was a loud, brittle sound. "This is ridiculous," she announced to the room. Turning to face the crowd, "This man is confused. That vehicle is a field asset. It is a loaner while my car is in the shop. This is an administrative misunderstanding that we will clear up on Monday. Please, play the music." She waved her hand at the band, desperate to drown him out, but the band didn't play. The room was deadly quiet. "It is not a misunderstanding," I said. My voice wasn't amplified, but in the silence, it carried. I stepped away from the table. I left Mia standing there, clutching her rabbit, watching me with wide eyes. I walked toward my mother. I reached into my bag and pulled out the file Lydia had sent. "Administrative errors don't have delivery instructions." "Mother," I said. I opened the folder. I didn't look at the crowd. I looked at her. "I have the email chain right here," I said, keeping my tone flat, professional. Just like I had practiced, I began to read. From Marianne Ward to Apex Solutions. Date, November 4th. Marianne lunged for the paper. "Give me that." I stepped back, dodging her hand. Subject, invoice approval. I read louder. "Please process the payment of $12,000 for consulting services immediately. Route funds to the Kessler Logistics holding account." I turned to Grant. He was trembling so hard the ice in his glass was rattling. "And here's the registration note for the car." I continued. "Register as fleet vehicle. Tax exempt. Keep keys with MW. At 4402 Crestview Lane." I looked at the crowd. "She didn't borrow the car." I said, "She bought it with your donations. And she has been funneling money to her son-in-law's failing company through a shell vendor for 6 months. Grant, tell them she is lying," Sloane shrieked. "Tell them." But Grant couldn't speak. He looked like he was going to vomit. Marianne drew herself up to her full height. She was cornered, but she was still dangerous. "You ungrateful girl." She spat at me, her voice trembling with rage. "After everything I have done for you, I offer you a home. I offer you money. And you come here and create a scene? You are mentally unstable. Everyone knows it. You are having a breakdown." She turned to the crowd, her eyes pleading. "She is sick," Marianne said, pointing at me. "She lost her job. She is hysterical. Please, forgive her. It was a good performance." For a second, I saw people wavering. Maybe the mother was right. Maybe the daughter in the ill-fitting suit was crazy. Then, a voice rang out from the back of the room. It was deep and authoritative. "Apex Solutions?" A man in a tuxedo stood up near the bar. He was older, with silver hair. I recognized him from the business pages. He was a major commercial real estate developer. "Did you say the vendor was Apex Solutions Group?" the man asked. I looked at him. "Yes, sir." The man's face went dark. He looked at Grant. "I know that name," the man said. His voice was loud, cutting through the tension like a knife. "That is the same shell entity that was named in the subcontractor lawsuit against Kessler Logistics last year. They were sued for billing for phantom freight." He pointed a finger at Grant. "You told the court that company was dissolved," the man said. "You told the creditors there were no assets." Grant's face turned the color of ash. He took a step back, knocking over his chair. It clattered to the floor with a sound like a gunshot. "No," Grant stammered. That is a different apex. The man shook his head. I don't think so, he said. And if you are billing a charity through a dissolved shell company that is not just debt, son, that is fraud. Federal fraud. The word fraud hung in the air. The spell was broken. The room erupted. People started whispering, pointing, pulling out their phones. The social shield Marianne had built, the wall of money and reputation, shattered instantly. Marianne looked around wildly. She saw the judgment in their eyes. She saw her friends turning away. She saw the waiter backing off. Grant didn't wait. He saw the developer reaching for his phone, probably to call his own lawyers or the police. Grant turned and ran. He pushed past a waiter, sprinting toward the kitchen exit, his tuxedo tails flapping behind him like the wings of a panicked crow. Grant! Sloane screamed, running after him. Grant! Wait! They fled. They actually ran away. Marianne was left alone. She stood in the center of the ruin of her reputation. She looked at the door where they had vanished. Then she looked at me. Her eyes were not sad. They were hateful. You did this, she whispered. You destroyed this family. I looked at her. I felt the weight of the file in my hand. I felt the ghost of the cold wind on the sidewalk. No, Mother, I said calmly. I just balanced the books. I turned my back on her. I walked over to the table where Mia was standing. She was watching me, clutching her bunny. Did we win? Mommy? She whispered. I picked her up. She felt heavy and solid and warm. Yes, baby, I said. We won. I looked up at Caleb on the stage. He gave me a small nod. He spoke into the microphone one last time. The audit begins tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, he said. He stepped down. We walked toward the exit. The crowd parted for us. Nobody tried to stop us. Nobody offered us champagne, but as we walked out into the cool night air, leaving the glittering lights and the lies behind us, I realized I didn't need their approval. I had my daughter. I had the truth. And for the first time in my life, I was free. The chaos in the ballroom was absolute. Grant's exit had been less of a departure and more of a panicked flight, leaving a vacuum of shock in his wake. The heavy double doors were still swinging from his escape. Marianne Ward stood alone in the center of the room. The circle of admirers who had surrounded her just 10 minutes ago had expanded, backing away as if she were radioactive. But my mother is a survivor. She is a creature of spin. I watched as she took a deep breath, smoothed the front of her shimmering silver gown, and attempted to pivot. He tricked me, she announced, her voice trembling with a perfectly manufactured fragility. She looked at the faces staring at her. The mayor, the developers, the old money families. You saw him run. He deceived me. I am a victim here. I trusted my son-in-law, and he abused that trust to defraud this beautiful organization. She brought a hand to her chest, her eyes filling with tears. I had no idea, she whispered. I am devastated. For a heartbeat. The room wavered. She was good. She was so incredibly good at playing the martyr that I saw Mrs. Gable, the elderly donor Caleb had mentioned, hesitate. But we were not done. Caleb, who had stepped down from the stage, walked over to me. He held a tablet in his hand. He didn't need a microphone this time. The silence in the room was so profound that a whisper would have sounded like a shout. He tricked you? Caleb asked, his voice cutting through her performance. Marianne glared at him. Yes, he is a criminal. I will help the authorities in any way I can. Caleb tapped the screen of his tablet and turned it to face the board members who had gathered near the front. Then explain this, Caleb said. He held up the digital record. It wasn't the invoices this time. It was the personnel file. The red file he had pulled from the archives. This is a record from the internal compliance server, Caleb said, reading aloud. It is dated 3 years ago. It is a warning flag regarding the diversion of funds for personal hospitality expenses. He swiped to the next page. And here is a warning from last year regarding the unauthorized use of the tax-exempt status for private vehicle acquisition. Caleb looked at my mother. Grant didn't override these flags. Marianne, you did. Your login, your biometrics. He looked at the crowd. She has been warned 3 times by the internal automated system. Each time, she used her administrative privilege to suppress the audit. This isn't a victim being tricked. This is an architect managing her design. The color drained from Marianne's face. The victim mask slipped, revealing the terrified, angry woman underneath. "You dug into my private files?" she hissed. "That is illegal. It is the Foundation's files." Caleb corrected her. "And I am a founder." Marianne looked around wildly for an exit, but the crowd blocked her path. She looked at me. Her eyes were pleading now, desperate. "Ella," she said, Tell them I am your mother. Tell them I helped you." She took a step toward us. She reached out a hand, not toward me, but toward Mia. She wanted a prop. She wanted to hug her granddaughter and look human again. "Come here, Mia," she cooed, her voice shaking. "Come to Grandma." I felt Mia stiffen against my leg. The entire room held its breath. Mia stepped out from behind me. She didn't run to her grandmother. She stood her ground, clutching her gray rabbit with the broken ear. She looked at the woman in the silver dress, the woman who lived in a mansion while we slept on a cot. Mia tilted her head, confused, and asked the question that no amount of spin could fix. "Grandma?" Mia said. Her voice was high and clear like a bell. "Yes." "Darling?" Marianne said, forcing a smile. "Why did you leave us out in the cold?" Mia asked. It was a simple question. It wasn't an accusation. It was just a 5-year-old trying to understand why the person who was supposed to love her had left her on a freezing sidewalk. The silence that followed was suffocating. It was heavy and final. Marianne's mouth opened, but no words came out. There was no spin for that. There was no administrative error that could explain abandoning a child. The socialite standing next to Mrs. Gable turned her back, then Mrs. Gable turned hers, one by one. The room turned away. It was a wave of rejection, silent and devastating. Marianne was left standing on an island of empty floor, stripped of her stage, stripped of her audience. A man in a dark suit, the chairman of the board, stepped forward. "Marianne," he said, his voice cold, "we are convening an emergency vote right now." He didn't even look at the other members. He just looked at her. "You are suspended effective immediately," he said. "Security will escort you out. Your access to the building and the systems is revoked. And frankly, if I were you, I would call a criminal defense attorney before morning." Marianne looked at him, then at me. She didn't scream. She didn't fight. She just seemed to shrink. The air went out of her. She looked old. She turned and walked toward the door. She held her head high, clinging to the last shred of her dignity. But nobody watched her go. They were looking at the floor, or their drinks, embarrassed to have ever applauded her. I felt a tug on my sleeve. It was Sloane. She was standing there, mascara running down her cheeks, looking like a lost child. "Ella," she whispered. "Grant took the car keys. I don't have a ride." I looked at my sister. For years, she had been the golden child. She had played the game perfectly. And now, she was realizing that she was just a piece on the board, to be sacrificed when the king was in check. "I don't know what to do." Sloane sobbed. "The house, the loans, it is all in his name. If he runs," she reached for my hand. "Can I come with you?" she asked. "Just for tonight?" I looked at her manicured hands. I thought about the phone call where she threatened to take Mia away from me. I thought about the 1 week to Neil comment. I felt a pang of pity, but it was distant. It wasn't my burden to carry anymore. I had a daughter to protect. I couldn't save people who were drowning because they refused to learn how to swim. "No, Sloane," I said gently. She blinked, shocked. "What?" "You cannot come with us," I said. "We are staying in a shelter. You wouldn't like it, but where will I go?" she asked. "I don't know," I said, "but you are smart. You will figure it out." I squeezed her hand once, then let go. I turned to Caleb. "Are we done?" I asked. Caleb smiled. The lines of worry on his face seemed to have smoothed out. "We are done," he said. We walked out of the ballroom, past the stunned waiters, past the glittering ice sculptures. We walked out into the cool night air. The yellow taxi was gone, but the air tasted sweeter than champagne. 2 days later, I was sitting in Caleb's office at the Brighthaven shelter. The mood was different now. The tension was gone. The phone was ringing off the hook. But it wasn't creditors. It was donors who had heard the story and wanted to support the new direction of the fund. Caleb placed a contract on the desk in front of me. "What is this?" I asked. "It is a job offer," he said. I picked it up. Director of Finance and Compliance. The salary was fair. More than fair. It was enough to live on. "We need someone who can spot a fake invoice from a mile away," Caleb said, grinning. "And we need someone who isn't afraid to speak truth to power. I think you are overqualified." I looked at the paper. I felt a lump in my throat. "I would love to," I said. "And there is one more thing," Caleb said. He pulled out a flyer for a program I hadn't heard of, the Heritage Housing Initiative. Since we recovered the assets from the misappropriated vehicle fund, which the board clawed back from your mother's accounts this morning. By the way, we have some extra budget for transitional housing support. He pointed to the flyer. This program provides grants for homeowners who need critical repairs to make their properties habitable. It is a grant. Ella, not a loan. You don't have to sign over the deed. You just have to prove ownership and need. I stared at him. "The duplex. You mean I can fix the heat?" I asked. "Fix the heat? Fix the roof? Fix the plumbing?" Caleb said. "It is your grandfather's house. You should live in it." I signed the contract. My hand didn't shake. 6 weeks later, the smell of fresh paint is the best smell in the world. It smells like a blank slate. I stood on the porch of the duplex. The neighborhood was still rough around the edges. There was a dog barking 2 streets over, and the sidewalk was cracked, but it was ours. The heat was humming inside, a steady, rhythmic sound that meant we would never be cold again. Mia was in the front yard. The ground was just starting to thaw. She was holding a small shovel, digging a hole in the patch of dirt by the stairs. "What are you doing, baby?" I asked, leaning against the railing. "Planting," she said, grunting with effort. "Planting what?" She held up a small acorn she had found in the park. "A tree," she said, "so it can grow big and cover the house, like a shield." I walked down the steps and knelt beside her. I helped her dig the hole deeper. We placed the acorn in the dirt and covered it up, patting the earth down with our hands. "It will take a long time to grow." I told her. "That is okay," Mia said, wiping a dirty hand across her forehead. "We are not going anywhere, right?" I looked at the house. I thought about the deed locked in my fireproof box inside. I thought about my mother, who was currently facing an indictment for wire fraud and living in a rented condo while her assets were frozen. I thought about Sloane, who had finally gotten a job as a receptionist and was learning, for the first time, what a dollar was actually worth. "No, baby," I said, "we are not going anywhere. Nobody can kick us out. This is home." Mia smiled, then ran off to find a rock to mark the spot. I stood up and looked down the street. The sun was setting, casting long, golden shadows. I took a deep breath. I used to think family was about blood. I used to think it was about endurance, how much you could take, how much you could forgive, but I was wrong. Family is not the people who anchor you to the bottom. It is the people who help you build the boat. And boundaries? Boundaries are not walls you build to keep people out. They are the garden fences you build to keep the good things in. I had fought for my fence. And now, standing in the fading light, I knew that the things growing inside it, my daughter, my dignity, my peace, were safe. And that was the only inheritance I ever really needed. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It was a long road from that cold sidewalk to this warm porch, and I am so glad you walked it with me. I would love to know where you are tuning in from right now. Are you listening on your way to work, or maybe tucked in bed at home? Let me know in the comments below. I love reading about where our community is from. If you enjoyed seeing justice served, please make sure to subscribe to Lily Revenge Stories. Hit that like button, and smash the hype button to help this story get recommended to more people who need a reminder to stand tall. Until next time, stay safe and keep your boundaries strong.